Hello, welcome back to IFRS Easy. I am Aladam Lauton, and like I promised, I said I was going to continue with the playlist I created for the purpose of talking about my experience in terms of getting a job in Canada. Yeah, so this is the second one. If you've not watched the first one, please check my playlist for the relocation itself. Okay, so the first one I'll be talking about today is with respect to the interview questions. And I told you that I did a whole lot of interviews. I did for several companies, and I did for Europe, I did for North America as well. Yeah, so basically it's more like a picture of some of those questions that they asked me that I think are general and that applies to everyone regardless of your field. And basically that's what we're talking about. So if you have any questions, you can just drop them in the description, in the comment section. I will attend to them as I'm able to. And if you think there are some other things that you'd like me to talk about, please also put it in the comment section. And please also like, comment, and share so that I can know that you guys actually need me to continue with this. Okay, so I'll be running through them one after the other. And all right, so let's get started. The first one is the general question that we all know, which is tell me about yourself. Yeah, so I have a list here, so I'll be looking at my laptop as I talk through them because I don't have them offhand. Yeah, so the first one is about tell me about yourself, and which I believe everyone should expect in any standard interview. So after telling me about yourself, I mean, I want to believe that you already know your role, you know your units, you know what you're applying to. And it's very, very important that you read about the job description itself even before you come for the interview. Yeah, so basically what I'll be looking at or talking about is not about the technical part. The technical part is your knowledge of the role you are joining, the unit you are joining rather, and your role. That's the technical part. But the other part is the skills in terms of your soft skills and also your leadership skills, the behavioral questions, the general behavioral questions, where there will be painting of situational judgments that you are supposed to apply. So that's what I want to talk about, the general soft skill question, behavioral questions that you can actually expect at all these kind of interviews. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so the first one that I have here that I know that almost all of them ask is the reason why I chose to interview with the company. That's standard. You have to know the reason why you've decided to interview with the company. Now, the second one is about why I've decided to relocate from Nigeria to whichever country, whether Canada, US, UK. They always ask that as well. I remember there was one that I did that they actually gave me feedback that I did not provide cogent reasons why I've decided I want to leave my country. So it's very important because it was one of the feedback that the HR gave me when they sent me, they rejected me. That's one of those things that the interviewer said is that you did not explain exactly why. I don't know what happened, but I know that it was one of the feedback I got. So it's very important that you already have it at the back of your mind that, okay, what will I say if they ask me why I want to leave the country? Especially if the company you're applying to is a multinational. So why do you want to leave? I mean, when the job you'll be doing here is the same thing that you'll be doing over there. So you have to be able to back that up with cogent explanations. So another question they ask here is that, what are the challenges that I expect to face in the role or in the country that I'm moving? Then another question that I remember being asked is that, what was a situation where you had to handle a difficult client? Just paint a scenario. And all these questions that they ask, you have to have enough scenarios at the back of your head that you want to use to answer that. It's very, very important that you have them at the back of your head so that at least as you are saying it, you are telling a story behind it. So it makes it more interactive when you put a story behind everything that you say. Then another question is a situation where you had a disagreement with your manager. Yeah, so I mean, what led to that disagreement and how did you approach it and what was the solution or what was the conclusion? What did you guys arrive at? So you have to also have an answer for that you've prepared for that as well. Then another question that always comes up is that, what's your leadership style? Or what will your colleagues or your managers say about you? So it's important that you have an answer for that, and don't just pick a general word. Don't just say, okay, this is what I think they will say. You also have to be able to explain situations where you have actually displayed that. So it's important that everything you say, you back it up with these stories. Very, very important. So that's why it makes sense when you actually have the stories down, you've prepared towards it. So as they are giving it to you, you are giving it to them out. So that's how it works. Then another question that always comes up, in Nigeria, many of our HR, they always talk about, okay, tell us about your weakness and all, But the way they phrase it is that, what's your most recent development feedback that you've gotten? Can you share that with us? So you want to talk about that as well. You also want to talk about the steps that you've taken to improve on them. There's nobody that is perfect. So oftentimes, regardless of how good you are, there will always be some feedback that talks about, okay, the areas that you need to improve on. So you have to know what you are saying, and then you have to prepare to tell that story as well. Then another question is that, what challenging project have you worked on, and how are you able to come through with it? So there are so many scenarios I can talk about based on your experience. Then another question that I always get is, how do you manage conflicting priorities? And especially if you're in an industry where there are a whole lot of things to do, you have more than one project you're working on. How do you meet with deadlines? How do you say no to some projects? How do you meet up with some projects when the deadlines are crazy and then you're trying to do this, do that? How do you manage it? You should have a story for that as well. You should you should have something to say about, okay, this is the experience I had, this is how I approach it, or this is how I always approach stuff like that. So it's very important that you have answers to that kind of question. Then another question is with respect to, how do you keep industry awareness? That is, how do you develop yourself? What are those things that you look out for now to develop yourself? So it's a very important question as well, and they always look out for what you say in that regard. So it's one of those things that you need to actually take into consideration while preparing for an interview. Another question, which I'm sure you already know, is where do you see yourself in, it could be 3 years, it could be 5 years, depending on the question. But this general answer is that you want to talk about the fact that you see yourself in the firm. It's very, very important that you say that. If you say that you will no longer be in the firm, then what's the point? Why did they want to employ you or bring you from one country to another? So it's important that you have an answer for that as well. The another question that came up with respect to, is there a situation whereby you wish that you've handled something differently? So maybe you've delivered a project to a particular client, or the manner in which you delivered that project was not good enough. So they want you to talk about, okay, how did you handle it, and what did you think you should have done differently? So that's one of the questions that I was asked in some of the interviews that I had. Then another question is to tell us about a time where you had to stand up for your own belief. So maybe in terms of probably an integrity issue. What did you do? What was the scenario? And the major thing about all these questions is that you need to have a scenario. You need to have, and there's this star approach that people always say, but I don't like talking about star approach. My own is that, what was the condition that occurred? What was the event? What exactly happened? And how did I approach it? And what was the result? So once you're able to define the scenario, you're able to talk about how you approach this and what the result is, whether you have to make some improvements. The major thing is that you tell a story that is true to you and that you can defend. That's the major thing. Don't try and cook up stories. Just look for whatever. It could be a random stuff that happened at work. Just pick it up, build a story around it, and deliver it in such a way that you believe in what you're saying, and you look at the impact that what you're saying actually gives. So it's very important that you're true to yourself. Don't try and cook up stories. Just anything could actually work, as long as it is real, it is something that you experience, and then you have a story to tell about it. So the major thing is storytelling. Once you're able to tell a story, you're able to communicate, and you're confident enough to say, okay, this is what happened, this is what happened. You don't need to rush. You have to be calm. Just say what needs to be said. There's really no big deal. They are not harsh. Many of those that have interviewed me, they make you feel comfortable, they make you feel calm, and then you sort of, it's not even much of an interview, it's more of a conversation. And that's about it. Yeah, so aside from those, some of those things that I feel that you also need to look out for is with respect to reading up about the company's values. Yeah, so it's very important because I mean they might actually ask you about that. So aside that, one of those things I also do is I make sure I read up about the interviewers, because many times when they send me the interview link, they always include the names of the interviewers. So what I do is I go on LinkedIn, I search for them, I read about them, and I know what to say in terms of the questions to ask, in terms of how to relate with them, because I know the number of years they've worked, I know when they moved into the company, so I know quite a lot about them. So I'm able to drive the conversation around that. Yeah, so and one important thing is at the end of the interview, make sure you have questions to ask them, and it doesn't need to be the big deal sort of question. You can even talk about the fact that, oh, you saw that they've spent 10 years in the company, how has it been for them in terms of their experience, and they say a whole lot of things and it goes well. You could also talk about the fact that, oh, you noticed that they just moved in recently. What brought them into the company? I mean, what are those things that attracted them to the company? Why did they leave the previous company to this company and all? Yeah, so pretty much you have to read about your interviewers. It really gives you an edge because you're able to drive the conversation to your own strength. Yeah, so I think that's about it. And when you're also talking, please make sure you say everything that needs to be said. Don't try and be humble, especially when they talk about tell me about yourself. That tell me about yourself, which is the first question, is, they say that your first impressions really matter. So when you are telling them about yourself, you're actually telling them about yourself in terms of talk about your education. And when you're talking about your education, you don't have to say so many things. You just talk about, okay, this is what you studied. You don't even need to talk about your institution, except maybe you graduated from Harvard or Oxford or all those. It's not compulsory. You need to mention. They might not even know, so you don't need to mention your institution. Just talk about the fact that if you have a BSc in economics, you talk about that. I have a BSc in economics. And if you did graduate the first class, you don't need to mention your second class or past second class. All those ones don't matter. If you have first class or distinction, then you can also push that to build that reputation you're looking for. Yeah, so you don't need to talk too much about that, but you need to sell yourself. Then you also don't need to mention the year you graduated. There's no point. Just talk about the fact that you have BSc this and this and that's it. So you don't really need to push that one too much. So aside from talking about your education, you also need to talk about your professional certification. So if you have any professional certification, you talk about that, talk about how it adds value to the role you are joining or how it has added value to your previous job. So it's very important that you talk about that as well. Then when you're talking about where you have worked, it is, for me, the way I structure it is I first talk about where I am, that is in terms of my role, in terms of the company I am. Then I now talk about the most relevant job roles that I've had in the past. So say for example, I've worked in 3 companies, company A, company B, company C. Company A is my first job, company B is my second, company C is my current. So I first talk about my role here and the company that I'm currently working with, and I now start with company A. So I start from company A, company B, then I come back to company C. Then in company C, I now talk about my roles, the description of my job, and what I do. So it helps to build the conversation around, okay, where are you at? Where have you been? And where are you at now? So that's why I structure that. You could structure it the way it works for you, but for me, that's how it works for me. Then aside from talking about your description, your job description, what you've done, you also need to talk about the kind of clients you have worked on. So maybe you've focused on financial services or non-financial services. You have to talk about that as well. So you basically want to let them know how you fit into the role that you're applying to. And you also have to talk about your technical abilities. I mean, you have to talk about how good you are with respect to some technical things that are required on the job. So you have to be able to sell yourself. You have to be able to, I mean, don't hide anything. Don't try and be humble. This is you selling yourself. So it's very important that you see everything that needs to be said. In fact, you also talk about personal projects too. So maybe probably you work with an NGO. I mean, you have to talk about that. Maybe you run a blog or vlog. You talk about that. You talk about anything that sells you, as long as it is relevant. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much it. I'll be doing more in subsequent videos because there are so many things that I would like to discuss, but I want us to put them in bits so that we're able to, it won't be boring, it won't be too long, and then we're able to extract every gist from what needs to be said. Thank you so much for coming by. Please, if you have any comments or any questions to ask, put it in the comment section. And please don't forget, I'm not a travel consultant, so any questions they're asking me, please, they are questions that should talk about my experience. Yeah, thank you so much. See you in the next video.